which is every successful innovation needs a tech toolbox, which I thoroughly agree with. So we have Simon Pike and Richard Billington from Netcall. And if you'd like to, let me just make sure you're invited to the stage, and they'll be talking to Esther. So Esther Stewart. Let me just invite everyone to the stage. Sorry, I should never be doing two things at once. It's never a good look for me. So, hi, Richard. Hi, Simon, hopefully any second now.
Morning.
Hi, Simon. Great to see you again.
Thank you, Andy.
I'm going to drop off now and leave you guys to have this discussion. I'm really interested to hear what's been going on. I've seen some interesting news coming out of you guys, so be great to hear about it. I'll let you know, obviously, if there's any problems with presentation showing or anything like that. Actually, you're in there already, so there isn't.
So can everybody see that all right?
That's coming through clear, Esther.
Yep. All right. So this is really a panel discussion with Simon, who's the market solution specialist with more than 30 years experience, and Richard, who is the CTO of really vast experience of working with a wide array of customers, from Vodafone to Nationwide, Thomas Cook, and the Department of Education, to help them to deliver improved service to their customers. So we're just going to do a bit of a questions and answers session this afternoon, and then there'll be the opportunity for some group chat after that. So take the opportunity to get involved in the chat, take your time to tell us what are the challenges that your organisation's facing, and hopefully we'll pick that up at the end of the session. So just making a start then, so what do you think the current challenges are that the councils are facing within going into 2021? Obviously this year's been a really challenging year, but what do you think the landscape looks like looking forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think we all recognise that 2020 has been a challenging year for local authorities and for the wider country, of course. I mean, I think the thing we have to remember is where councils have come from. We know that over the last 10 years or more, they've been under financial pressure to deliver more services, or same services or more, with less money. And we also know that it's common for there to be a mixed IT estate within those councils. And that ranges everything from, a filing cabinet, an Excel database or spreadsheet, access databases, a plethora of different systems, right up to, bleeding edge technologies like RPA, for example, which I know Rich is going to talk about a little bit later on. What COVID has done has resulted in, I think, some very good implementations of technology, but I think it's also had a knock-on effect on the backlog of IT projects. So some of those bigger scale projects that might have been in the pipeline had to be adjusted and changed priorities. So there's a little bit of a backlog, I think, from when we talk to councils of those projects still being there. Now, sorry, go on, Esther. So you can ask me.
No, I was just going to say that was what some of the organisations were reflecting on this morning. I know that there was a bit of chat in the room around the challenges around some of the bigger projects and how they've had to be reprogrammed and rephased. Yeah. But I think we also had a couple of really good examples of councils or organisations, because one of them was the Scottish Rural University, around how they've really been able to accelerate that pace of change. So I think there is, I think there's been progress in some areas, but like you say, there has been a knock-on effect within others.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And as you say, I was listening to some of those sessions this morning as well, and it was interesting to hear what was being said. And I think that what COVID has done is it's shown that actually the traditional way, if you like, of running an IT project within a council with multiple project boards and feasibility studies and stage progressions. And somebody said this morning, that the mythical perfect solution, if you like, that results in projects not being fulfilled, doesn't really exist in that sense. I think what local authorities and councils have learned to do is to adapt and to take what we would call a minimum viable product approach and work more agile. And I think that's one of the positive things, if you like, that's come out from COVID, is a change in the way that IT projects are run, and that they've had to evolve quickly, and that can show that councils can be responsive and that they can start to see those benefits from a project perhaps a little bit quicker than they might otherwise have done.
So, I mean, I think that's a really important point about that early realisation of benefits, because I think we've heard across the board this morning around organisations struggling with budget challenges and a reduction in resource, and I think some of them have got maybe bigger waterfall style projects, and the delayed realisation of benefits is maybe not an environment that we can go forward with any longer. Simon, I just wanted to ask, like, I've seen some really good stuff being shared on social media around innovative work some of the councils are doing, and from the organisations that you work with, is there things that you would say that the more innovative organisations have got in common?
Yeah, I think that I think innovators in that sense, you know, they don't focus on how to deliver at the start. They go to market for a specific solution, like a CRM, for example. They look at the bigger picture. And I think the way to do that is to look at what your organisation is trying to achieve as a whole. You know, councils are quite good, if you like, at working in silos and in their departments. And I think what's important is to, you know, from a good digital strategy perspective, I think and what we see is where it's successful is those ones that look at the wider council and go, right, well, what are we actually trying to achieve? You know, for example, if we were to pick a routing technology for council resources, for example. You know, if you've got a waste team and a services delivery team and a bins management team or a potholes team, and they all had their own solutions with routing in there, that's not necessarily the best way to think about it. And actually, you need to take a higher level and go, actually, we've got to do routing across a number of departments. Can we find a way of talking to all of those departments as stakeholders and end users of the solution, and getting a routing mechanism that works for them all, and implementing that, and then having those departments use that service, because that's the best way, I think, and that's how innovators are the ghost councils who are really being innovators are working, and they're taking a more linear approach as to their organisational structure. And I think that's massive in terms of seeing how they can make improvements, see those benefits coming through quicker as well, because they're not getting bogged down in their own process, if you like. Yeah, they're thinking about it as a wider picture. Now that does mean, obviously, that solutions have to be open and flexible to work with other systems, of course, and that's having open integration standards and working together with your peers, and not just within your council, but within your neighbours or within other councils around the UK as well, and perhaps sharing your plans and your ideas, because you might find somebody who's already done some of that work.
So you mentioned there a bit around sort of tech flexibility, and I know that some of the organisations this morning have talked about the challenge with working with legacy systems, and Edinburgh talked a bit around the goal around the single view of the customer, and I think that's a vision that a lot of organisations share. But when you're talking about tech flexibility, what exactly do you mean by that?
So I think that's about having a solution that is open to integration with other systems, is open to you adapting it to your own needs. We know that councils have again, if we go back over time, you know, they might buy a point solution off a shelf application to do a specific job. Now that's fine, because it will work for you at that point in time. But what it won't do is it won't work with you as you go forwards, without having to go back to a supplier to get them to make changes. What you need is a system which is more flexible than that allows you to train up your own users to perhaps make those changes, to be in control of those processes, to adapt that as time changes and as policy changes. And I think if you can get a solution that does that, and if you can work with other councils that have also done the same, then you get a really truly flexible solution that can work for you, not against you.
I mean, I think that's a really good point. And I mean, you've talked a bit around that sort of flexibility, and the thing that you hear more and more is around the sort of low code development. I know that, I mean, I'm working with an organisation at the moment, and we're looking at a sort of CRM or a platform based approach, and people talk a lot around the use of the citizen developer. But so what would you say, Richard, the main difference between a kind of low code or a no code approach, or is there any difference?
Yeah, there is, and I think you made a great point just before, actually, about the platform approach. I mean, Simon mentioned sort of disparate teams working in departments. The reality is now that there is probably an off-the-shelf solution for every problem that you've got, but as an organisation, that's going to leave you with a multitude of suppliers to support, a multitude of different solutions built in different technologies to maintain moving forward, and that isn't going to work. And we worked with one council that did an audit of their IT estate and had 500 disparate solutions built in everything from Excel and Access through to the big suppliers supplying the Rev and Bens and so on solutions. And for a council that then needs to bring in the digital skills to manage and maintain that, it's almost an impossible task. One of the benefits of low code, no code solutions is you can deploy a platform and then allow those business departments to build the solutions that they require on it, giving you one supplier, one technology stack, and the ability to drop individuals from different departments into an area that requires some additional resource. And because they've been trained up in that one solution, they can then support their colleagues, as opposed to needing to be retrained in whatever technology or solution that department might otherwise have used. So you really do get some economies of scale there, the benefit of that single approach. And that approach can be taken in either no code or low code. So obviously, as the CTO of a vendor of low code software, I'm going to have a slightly biased opinion on which way I'd go. But there are obviously pros and cons. I wrote a blog on the subject just to try and demystify it a little bit for those that hadn't already seen it. And the no-code vendors will push the fact that you need to do no coding, but that is equally true with low-code platforms. The difference for me is a low-code platform gives you the ability to extend the capabilities of the platform that you've brought. So every piece of software, every platform will have a defined scope in terms of what you can achieve upon it. No one piece of software is a silver bullet for every solution, and us as vendors of a technology would never state that it is. There's the right solutions to use low code for, and there's the wrong solutions to use low code for. But you've got to understand the scope in what can be achieved within any piece of software that you purchase. So a no code solution might be absolutely perfect for you for a specific use case that can be achieved within that piece of software. But if you want to do something that can't, you're stuck, and no code vendor should tell you otherwise. With low code, with the appropriate skills, you get the ability to extend the platform's capabilities. So you can add that extra feature that you need, expand upon what's already there. And at that point, you are going into, a developer requirement. But up to that point, as with no code, you can use citizen developers. And certainly within the public sector, we've found that those individuals that have been picked, that have been given the appropriate amount of time, really can then deliver solutions. And as Simon said, we have an approach of the community, because councils aren't competing for business against each other. So they can really reuse and share what they develop, obviously saving each other time in the process.
So, I mean, some of what you're describing really changes what you would be asking suppliers in a procurement exercise, because it's a bit different to just saying, like, you're looking for a CRM that can do X. And one of the things that I've found with a number of organisations is that always realism about what's actually needed internally. So it's not just about the functionality of the system, but it's making sure that you're setting that project up for success. And I know that some of the other organisations touched on this morning, but making sure that you've got the right people in the right roles, and that you're resourced internally to be able to deliver that project successfully. So as somebody that's working with an organisation that's looking at a sort of customer experience sort of platform tender, can you give some advice about the types of questions that we should be thinking about to challenge our suppliers on and ask as part of the tender process?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously difficult to draft the tender because you go out to your own business and everyone wants something, and in the end, everyone wants everything. But the problem there is, you end up with a requirement list that is ridiculously large, and if you attempt to meet it all as a result, you're probably going to be paying way more than you need to for what's actually required. So there are, I think, some very pertinent questions that should definitely be asked when assessing any vendor. And I would start personally with, can anyone build using the software, or who can build using the software? What skills are required, and what's the learning curve, the training requirement? Because there's a digital skills shortage out there. We know that. There's a million blogs written on the topic. There aren't enough developers. In this country, we've been a little bit slow to modify our learning within schools to bring digital skills to the fore. That has changed in the last couple of years. I've actually done quite a bit of work on that myself over the last 10 years, trying to work with universities to ensure the digital skills gaps, closed, because we will be competing globally. And because now everyone's working from home, we really are competing globally. If we want some outsourced developers in Eastern Europe, there'll be a million other companies looking to do the same as well. So councils are going to be competing with commercial customers and other councils for very scarce resource. Now, if you can open up that pool of who can build those solutions within your organisation by bringing in, say, business analysts that have got, a semi-technical background, they know the process, they know what the user needs, the customer need, and no longer do they just have to document that and hand it off to IT. They can actually get involved with creating that solution. You're going to close the gap. And you're going to close the gap in that misunderstanding that always occurs between what's documented and what ends up being delivered by IT. And if you can put the individuals that have worked with the customer and the business department to understand what's needed into the team, the multidisciplinary team that's going to then create that solution, you're going to end up with a better outcome quicker as a result. So that would be my first question. Who can use it? What's the learning curve? What training options do you give me as a vendor? And then we'd walk on, to some of the more obvious stuff. How can it be tested? How can I ensure quality? Again, what skills are required to test it? What software do I need to test the solution that's built on your no-code, low-code platform? How do I produce documentation? Is it something I have to do manually, or can the platform help me document it? Because inevitably, we'll deliver a solution to great fanfare, it'll do its job, we'll move on to something else, but that solution will require updates in the future, whether that's regulatory or process. You want to have that sort of iterative process of improvement, and therefore we need to document what we've done to ensure that whoever comes in next can take that off our hands.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, if I can. So I think there's a couple of other things that need to be considered as well. I think Richard touched on it slightly in terms of improving the solution that you develop on the platform. It is about understanding and asking your vendors what there is in place to support you as a builder. Is there a series of online training to go with that? Is there flexibility for you to make those changes yourselves as policy changes? How easy is it to do that? How flexible are the screens that we talked a little bit about earlier on? But also, does the system help you identify areas for improvement in your process as well? A good low-code system will have a process model in it and should be able to track, how many cases are progressing through a stage, where it sits, where the bottlenecks are, to allow you to adjust that. And I think that's a critical area within there.
That's really useful and provides some good sort of broad advice. And we've talked a bit about this morning around some of the most important aspects of projects as people and around buy-in across the organisation. But what advice would you give to a customer or an organisation that's just about to embark on a low-code project?
I think we've got examples now of working with on the low-code side of the business, maybe 20 or so, 20, 30 councils implementing low-code either as their big citizen front-end portal or just complement and deliver solutions into individual departments. And there's some evidence there as to what works and what doesn't. For me, I think you've got these three different sort of factors for success. The first would be, this isn't a job that can be done part-time by someone. We see all the time a council will bring the platform in, and they'll say we're gonna train someone up, and that person's going to do it alongside their day job. You're asking too much. These are and needs to be enterprise quality software solutions that you will deliver into your citizens. Now, we know that we don't need traditional development resource to do it on a no-code, low-code platform, but we still need experience. We still need, concentration, dedication, everything else that might come with delivering a solution otherwise. So make sure you pull a team together. You take those individuals out of their frontline roles. Doesn't have to be forever, for a period of time while they build this solution, and give them the ability to integrate their knowledge and understanding of the process and of the customer journey into a multidisciplinary team. So point number 2, involve all of the users, build a multidisciplinary project team, and that should have those frontline workers, like I say, but you will require IT. There needs to be that technical experience available to you. And the best examples we've seen are where a council has brought it in collaboration with IT as a platform, not as a spot solution, as a platform, and then trained appropriate resources, let those citizen developers spec out and deliver solutions. But where there is maybe API integration, some security, some firewalls to set up, they've got somebody that they can lean on and leverage within the IT team that's got that experience and background to ensure that things are done the right way. Now, the platform will protect you against making a lot of mistakes. It'll ensure when you run the build validator, and I'm talking about our platform here, obviously, I'm sure there's these examples of the same functionality in other vendors as well, but it will highlight to you, you've got user roles without appropriate permissions. You haven't set firewalls up on these interfaces. It will educate you, but there's no substitute for experience. So leverage IT, but bring in citizen developers to accelerate your digital transformation. And as you do that, ensure that you're promoting a common way of working amongst your teams. So as I mentioned, you can go off and allow business department 1, 2, and 3 to build apps A, B, and C. And that's great. But if they're all built, structured, and delivered in a very common way, then when you need to go back to solution A, you can take somebody that worked on solution B and C, because you've come up with a common way working to a set of agreed standards. And that could be naming conventions, that can be your page layout and designs, that can be the way your data model is structured or your processes implemented. If you set that up and structure that well and get a common agreement across the business at the start, your path to success is going to be a lot easier as a result. And we've seen that with councils that have delivered 5, 10, 15 different solutions, and then now they've got a common team that can just jump into anything to update any one of them.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think thinking about your internal requirements in relation to resource and project sponsorship is just as, if not more important than the technology that you're actually choosing. We also heard Edinburgh talking earlier on around how they've used RPA as part of their business improvement, and particularly in their drive towards the paperless office. And I think RPA for me continues to be a hot topic amongst a number of different councils, particularly around some of the benefits, but also around some of the challenges. Simon, I just wondered if you could talk a wee bit around, where do you see RPA having the biggest impact within councils?
To me, RPA is something that's thought of, heard of within local authority. I think there's still a bit of a lack of understanding, perhaps, or lack of knowledge rather than understanding as to how they actually work and what they can do for you. I think there's 2 levels to it. There's an unattended and an attended way of using RPAs within a local authority, particularly. There are other ways of using it, but those 2 are the ones that jump out at us as a supplier for RPA. And I think that in an unattended way, it's about using it to perform some of those back-end processes, if you like, back-end integrations between systems, passing information from system A to system B, potentially where you might have otherwise had to rekey it, or where there might be, let's say, expensive APIs needed from a vendor, and actually it doesn't prove cost effective to take that approach. And that can be done where the system then generates the request to pass that information rather than it being a person doing the work. the second of that is then the attended side on the right hand side. So things like front office activities, or doing what we call is human in the loop. So that might be, let's say, a contact centre's taking a phone call to ask about a council tax balance or a rent balance from a citizen. So they will make a request themselves to get, can I get that information? It's still doing an element of integration to another system, but it's a human generated request in that sense. So they would go and do that, and that would bring back the information, and then they might go off and make the payment on behalf of the citizen, or push them through to a voice system to take the payment, so they're not capturing the sort of comply with PCI, etc. Now, I think that's the two different ways of working. One being an unattended and back office and process generated request and use of RPA, and another being front of house, somebody actually making that request. They're not doing massively different things in terms of an integration, but that's where it can work in that way. I mean, the other thing on the unattended, obviously, is something around data mining and patterns and looking across a range of data. Potentially using that to identify people that might fall into a category of missing council tax payments, and therefore trying to get ahead of that a little bit and offering them payment plans. It can be used for that as well, obviously.
I mean, just thinking around the whole sort of RPA side of things. I mean, some of the discussions that I've heard is one of the key challenges is that to get buy-in at an executive level, quite often people are looking at how you release the sort of cashable savings, and sometimes it can be quite difficult, particularly as a smaller organisation, if you're trying to make a business case, because sometimes the upfront cost can seem quite high. Can you just talk a wee bit around what questions you should be thinking about when you're engaging with an RPA supplier?
Yeah, I mean, RPA for me is hugely exciting, for one. So we've seen a big uptick in commercial customers across the UK and globally that have really invested in RPA. They're making good savings, automating really manually intensive processes, and taking out that expensive human resource to do so. But we didn't really see that trickle down into our local government customers, NHS to an extent, but not so much to our local government customers. And when we spoke to people and tried to understand why, it is the cost, like you say. There's three sort of mega vendors really in the RPA space, big American companies, and the way that they typically price RPA is they look at how much an FTE would cost, and then to replace them with a digital worker, they bring the annual FTE cost down a little bit, and then that's what you have to pay per robot per year. So we, for anyone who follows us on social media, will know that we acquired an RPA software vendor earlier this year, and we've embedded that into our Liberty platform, because we believe it doesn't have to really be like that. There's a huge amount of use cases that would never get any automation performed via RPA if that was the way in which it was commercially deployed. So we've packaged it up as part of our offering, and we've come in at a price point that we believe will open up the use cases that can be achieved as a result. So in terms of what you'd need to ask an RPA supplier, again, first question, who can get involved in building automations? With anything, the cost of the technology is typically second to the cost of the expensive resource that might be needed to implement it. Humans, people cost money, especially those with experience. So can a citizen developer build my RPA automations? And one of the reasons that we acquired the organisation we did is that they had a very easy to understand front end to building automations, all drag and drop, WYSIWYG, much like the rest of our Liberty platform. So it felt like a really nice fit in that regard. It could allow the democratization of the creation of the RPA automations. Anyone who can understand the process that needs to be automated can drag and drop and build those building blocks to create that automation as a result. So we believe, again, lower learning curve, some online training. Anyone can get involved with creating these automations. The second question would be, what can be achieved through that sort of drag and drop WYSIWYG interface, and where do I drop into scripting? Because if I drop into scripting early, that's going to require IT, and as we know, IT are very busy, there's a backlog, and getting them involved in any digital transformation project is difficult. So again, when we were looking at the different vendors in the space, we ensured that our acquisition was done with an organisation where 99% of what you need to be to achieve will just be done through that WYSIWYG drag and drop interface, and you won't need to drop into scripting as a result. How robust are the automations? What if my solutions change? Again, there's a couple of different approaches to this. So some RPA vendors will identify elements on the page based on their screen position. The organisation that we acquired used AI and computer vision. So you would essentially tell the RPA bot, this is what the button looks like, this is what the screen looks like that I want you to interact with as part of the automation. And therefore, if that screen moved, if that button moved, the automation would still succeed. We did a lot of work trying to break automations that we created to understand where that line was between a robust automation and something that was essentially a little bit flaky that might fall over when solutions change, because solutions change all the time. And that's definitely something that should be checked and should be tested as part of any RPA vendor selection. How it incorporates and works alongside artificial intelligence and machine learning is important as well. They do complement each other as technologies. They do sit hand in hand, where you have RPA automations using AI, using machine learning to make decisions that feed in to that process flow. We see a lot that will hand off to sentiment analysis or natural language processing, where maybe an automation is fired off an inbound email being received. The first thing you might do is read that email in terms of sentiment. Is this a customer or a citizen that's happy? If they are, we can just handle it in the normal way. If they're angry, sad, frustrated, we might want to escalate it. Brilliant use of sentiment analysis. We've embedded that into our platform for that exact reason. And your RPA should be able to make use of those complementary technologies. And then probably the final one is what's required to run the bot. What do I need to stand up on my side in terms of a machine, a virtual machine or a desktop laptop to run the bot, because the bot does sit and interact with a desktop as a human would. They really are digital workers. They replace a human in doing what is typically maybe manual or repetitive tasks. And also find out whether every bot that you purchase, whether that's capable of running a single process or multiple processes. So the way in which we've implemented it, as an example, you can drop automation jobs into a queue, and those automation jobs can be for anything. If you can automate it, you can create a process around it, and then you can trigger that process when a citizen or customer interacts with you. And that list of work is then ticked off by the robot, one after the other. And the robot doesn't care what it does. It'll pick up a job that asks for a change of address for the customer, and it will complete that piece of work. And it'll pick up another job that asks for something else, and it will complete that. All you need to do is scale the number of bots based on the number of processes you're able to automate.
Thanks very much for that. I think that has been quite interesting, because this morning we've talked a lot around the importance of the people aspect within projects, and there's really sort of shined a spotlight on the technology as an enabler. But I think there's that appreciation that the success of the technology is really around that user-centered design and the focus on multidisciplinary teams. I know that both Edinburgh and the SRUC talked quite a bit around the multidisciplinary teams and focusing on that end-to-end sort of process mapping. So I think we've got some time just now to have a wee look in the chat and see if we want to take any questions. Simon, Richard, do you have any last thoughts before we have a look at what's happening in the chat?
Yeah, I mean, I think finishing up with RPA, I think the best use for me for RPA is freeing up staff that would otherwise be doing those manual repetitive tasks to then join your multidiscipline teams to start to deliver digital transformation. That's where you get your best bang for buck. You're freeing up the people that really know and understand the citizen journeys. And if they're sat there doing that sort of mind-numbing repetitive tasks, one, that's not great for them. And it's a waste of a resource that could be doing a much higher value piece of work. That's where we've seen the best success, where they've sort of looked around the business, cherry-picked those repetitive tasks, freed up those individuals, and then brought them into digital transformation projects as a result.
We've got a question in the chat, and this is always a popular one around data and data standards, and really around how I suppose effectively setting up your data standards at the beginning of any project can be key to delivering benefits longer term. Can you talk a wee bit around councils or organisations that you've worked with that are particularly innovative and how they're approaching this?
I mean, I think you're right. I think it's always a bit of a contentious one, isn't it? Because there's a lot of data which is very similar across a lot of authorities, and I think there are obviously some areas where data standards are set in place by government. You think about addressing, for example, there are standards in there for that, but standards across other data is not something that's really been resolved, I would say, at a central level. But I think those councils that are innovators are looking at it, as Richard said earlier, about setting out what your standards are for building within a platform. Mm-hmm. And if you get those in place right at the start and make sure everybody conforms to those across your council and all those parties that are using the platform, then you're not going to go far wrong. That's not to say that they're necessarily going to be the same as your neighbouring authority have put in place. But actually, if you're building in a consistent way and working collaboratively, not just within your authority, but across other authorities as well, as I said earlier, then I think you can get things in place that actually means you can share things efficiently and effectively. And that means then that you can all work together. And that's how those councils that we've seen that are being innovative are doing that. They are aware of the fact that it is a platform, putting things in place and willing to work with other authorities and councils. And that's where they're making the best use of that.
And you need to make sure that your platform enables you to do that. You shouldn't have any restrictions on the way in which you can structure your data to accommodate and align with the data standards that are out there. And then having done that, your data should be accessible and open to all. So you should be able to build your own APIs around that data to allow other software within your organisation to access that.
So just sort of following on with your mentioning APIs, somebody else in the chat saying that the RPA can fill a real gap with legacy software where APIs can either never exist or be too expensive. Can either of you or both of you give an example of a really innovative use of RPA that you've seen?
Innovative is interesting. I mean, by far the biggest use case where historically has been to achieve legacy integration. So where we see right back to green screens, that there was no concept of APIs at that point, or an AS400 sat in a dusty server room that has no web interface. How do you interact with that when you've then got cloud-based software that might need to update it? RPA sits and bridges that gap brilliantly. And I think the early use of it was largely around that, acting as the human, taking data from one place and inputting it into another where there wasn't another method to do that. There wasn't an API, there wasn't a more obvious approach to take. And then the use of it extended past that, whereby we had, and there are a number of large software vendors that do charge an inordinate amount of money for access to APIs. It's an add-on to the software that you've already purchased. If you want the API access, it's another X tens of thousands of pounds a year as a result. And people have cottoned on to the fact that RPA, with an appropriate user license for that piece of software, can sit there and interact with the UI as a human would without paying for that additional API cost. And we're doing a lot of that at the moment as well.
All right, thanks for that.
I would back that up, really. I think that's the one where we've seen it, being perhaps most beneficial within councils, particularly covering off those expensive APIs from big software vendors.
So I think that's probably your first port of call. What have I got? What am I doing within my organisation that RPA could be used to replace that? But then you can go on to the higher value after that. So Simon mentioned the data mining. We've got a great example of our technology being used in a hospital, whereby they are looking through patient records, patient data, with a robot, just reading constantly through patient records and data to spot signs for diabetes. It's a early warning system. So if it looks at your patient record and it sees you've got these 2 or 3 key indicators that might indicate you're on a path to diabetes, they'll push your record to the doctor The doctor will verify that, and then you'll be called in before you get the disease. Now, one example, health related, but pretty much, there'll be examples within every business where if you can keep continually checking your customer, your citizen records, you can get ahead of them coming to you with a problem. And what a great customer experience that is, to be proactively contacted and told, we're going to do this for you to stop this problem occurring in the future.
And I think where that comes into it, so just to add on to that, Richard, if I can, that bringing those costs for dealing with diabetes in this case earlier on is always going to be less cost for the trust than dealing with it further down the line. So if they can identify things earlier, it's going to cost them less to provide medical aid to those people the earlier they capture it, and that applies across councils in the same way.
All right, okay, but thanks to the guys at Netco for participating, and we'll also have Simon back tomorrow to participate in our technology panel, where we'll be talking about some hints and tips and advice as to how to get the most out of your technology projects, and why sometimes we're disappointed in the benefits that we see these projects being delivered. So I think that should be quite a lively supplier panel tomorrow morning. And I'll just hand back to Andy.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm a real fan of rapid iteration, low code, RPA. I think it can be looked down on by ICT departments a little bit as kind of legacy even before its time, but the reality is the power of it to enable you to solve problems in processes is just amazing. So really love that session. Thanks, Esther, Richard, Simon. That's been fantastic. I mean, unless anyone wants a question live, last chance to raise your hand up. We will be absorbing the overrun. So we're going to move just back to tables now, so that if anyone does want to pick anyone's brains, that would be great if you want to stop around. The room's still available. We're back tomorrow with a very technology-focused day, including tech panels and many other talks. So really, thanks a lot. Oh, go on, I'll ask you one question. What's next, Richard? You kind of alluded, I suppose, to AI and machine learning, but is there anything else that is another tool in the toolbox that you're starting to see emerge?
Yeah, so I put a little poll out on my LinkedIn and Twitter, just asking certainly councils or UK commercial or NHS trusts, what are you actually using AI for? So there's the narrow AI, as it's referred to, like sentiment analysis, natural language processing, where AI is doing a very specific task. You give it some inputs and it will give you an output, and it answers a specific question. But outside of that, are people really making the most of it? And not many people replied publicly, funny enough, but a lot of people came back to me privately and said that there really wasn't at the moment the solutions out there that allowed them to use AI and ML without bringing in data scientists or expensive third-party consultants. So, personally, I'm looking at how we can enable customers to get the most from AI and machine learning, but in a way simpler fashion. So, within a lot of the solutions that are built on our platform, as an example, you've got huge data sets there. Now, those data sets must be valuable to you if you can use AI and ML to understand, to get answers, to literally to ask questions. What are my citizens struggling with the most at the minute? And it comes back and tells you you've still got problems with potholes, or whatever it might be. I think that could be really valuable. And it's just, how do you implement it in a really easy to understand and meaningful way? Because our approach, as I know has always been, we want to be the easiest to use low-code platform. We want it to be a toolkit that it doesn't require really expensive resources or huge amounts of training to fully understand. So we try and present everything in a very consistent, simple, easy to use way, and we've tried to do that with RPA as well. And I think there's still a gap there around AI and machine learning. So that's something we'll definitely look to try and address this year, whether that's through a partnership, position or build something ourselves. But I really feel we can add some value for our customers there, certainly within local government. And otherwise, maybe process mining. I don't know how much anyone's interested in that within the group, but again, been looking into that recently. We've been working with a partner of ours where a customer wanted it. We put them in touch with a partner. We've been back and forth. And that's certainly one of the early stage steps that leads then on to a digital transformation project. Once you've mined your data, you understand where your problems are, and then you can obviously resolve them using low-code RPA, whatever it might be. So it feels like that would be quite a nice early stage enabler for an organisation to understand what problems they should be addressing. Again, a couple of established tools out there. Maybe we could look at doing something there. So yeah, there's a couple of sort of ideas we've got floating around at the moment. But any input from anyone in terms of where they think either we should go as an organisation or where they hope the industry and the market's going, would love to hear it.
It's very interesting. I like the toolbox analogy because that is the way systems are these days, isn't it? You are plugging things together and taking the right tool for the challenge. And that'll be different depending on the challenge in front of you. But that's been really insightful and really appreciate the time. And thank you to everyone that's come along today. And we will hopefully see you tomorrow. And we're going to go back to the floor. So big thanks, Simon, Richard, Esther. That was a really, really good session.